What's up, Marvel fans? We're the Hills Maniacs, and today we're going to be discussing the biggest questions that we have going into Thor: Love and Thunder. So I think the biggest question I have, or well, not the biggest one, but at least one of the big questions is, when exactly will this movie be taking place within the timeline of the main MCU? You know, because we've seen, like, Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, when they put it on Disney Plus, it was put before the events of Eternals, so I'm kind of basing it off of that instead of, like, when it takes place after Endgame, because, like, you'd think people would start reacting to what happened at the end of the Eternals movie with the whole celestial popping up out of the ocean and things like that. You'd think that would be a big deal, but nobody seems to be reacting to that. People are saying, like, why didn't Doctor Strange know about that if this took place, or if Eternals took place after that or whatever, but I guess he's dealing with incursions and stuff. So, like, when do you think this takes place in terms of at least Eternals, or between Eternals and, like, Endgame, like, in that period of time?
I mean, just based off of the trailers that I've seen, really, this could kind of take place anytime after that, because I don't think it's on Earth at all, except for when they're in New Asgard.
I guess that makes sense. I don't know. I think, I mean, obviously it's after Endgame. I'm gonna say maybe it's like a couple months maybe afterward, like, because it seems like Thor that we've seen in the trailers at least is trying to just kind of live out the rest of his life peacefully or whatever. He's trying to find this peace, like, where he can just kind of rest. It's like we heard him say his fists used to be tools for vengeance or whatever, and now they're tools for building peace or whatever. He says that in one of the trailers, and he just kind of wants to live in exile, I guess. But, you know, obviously the events of this movie are going to drag him back into everything. So, like, I assume this is months after Endgame, because we know he's been since Avengers Endgame, he's been traveling with the Guardians of the Galaxy. So, like, maybe there was a period where, like, in between the events of Endgame and this movie where he was just kind of with them but wasn't really getting involved in anything. So I'm going to say maybe it's like a few months later, maybe even a whole year. Like, we know Spider-Man Far From Home and No Way Home take place like a year and a half or something, 18 months after Endgame. So there's a long gap in there in relation to the other movies that we've seen so far, and even the shows and everything. So that's kind of where I think it falls within the timeline.
So I guess one of the questions I had was, and I'm glad you brought up Eternals, even though it was a crappy movie, is the fact that at the end of Eternals, I think it was the post-credit scene, we saw Dane, who was the, I guess, Earth boyfriend of Cersei, one of the Eternals. He ends up, I guess, is going to become the Black Knight.
Yes.
From the comics, and at the end he's standing there and he opens up a box, and inside is what I guess is called the Ebony Blade. So I guess my question is there some connection between that blade and the sword that Gore the God Butcher has?
Well, that would be interesting, because, like, these seem like they're both pretty powerful swords, and we don't really know. We haven't really seen anybody use swords in the MCU other than, like, Lady Sif, I guess, and Gamora. But
and
they're
technically Frigga.
Yeah,
not Frigga,
but I mean, they're like, they seem like they're just like normal swords. Like Dane Whitman's sword seems like it has powers to it, and this one I think is called, like, All Black, the Necro Sword or something that Gore uses. I've heard that from the comics and stuff, and it kind of has a relation to, like, the symbiotes, so, like, there could be some connection to Venom there, maybe.
We know Venom is technically still here.
In the MCU, right? So, I don't know in relation to Dane Whitman's sword, but I think it would be interesting to have, like, maybe that could be the new, almost like the new Infinity Stones kind of thing. There's all these powerful swords out there all of a sudden, or powerful weapons sort of like this that do different things or whatever, have this dark magic essence or something to them. That is a good question. Like, I never really even made that connection or kind of thought about that.
You mean so something that, like, if somebody wields all of them
they
like,
become super
powerful.
yeah, something something along those lines. I don't know if they'll go that route, but that is interesting that the last few like Phase 4 movies we've seen have had this kind of sword in it. So there could be some connection there.
I think it would be. It might make Eternals more important, at least the end credit,
right,
because it will connect to further on in the MCU.
Like maybe those swords share a connection, even like maybe this one is the enemy of the one
right,
from
kind of like Venom and Carnage,
the Ebony Blade, and so yeah, something along those lines. Like who knows?
Or we could find out that maybe they were created by the same person and placed throughout
right,
the cosmos.
All I know is, I mean, the MCU is different from the comics, so they can do whatever they want with these weapons. Like they did with the Infinity Stones, Thanos had a different reason for wanting to use them than he did in the comics. You know, it's just that's what's gonna happen. So like, I feel like there could be some connection there. Who knows for sure. And speaking of like weapons that are being used, I'd like to know how exactly Mjolnir is able to. I guess it reforms itself, or somebody reforges it together, because we see it in the trailers. Obviously, that Jane Foster is going to become Lady Thor in this movie, or the Mighty Thor, I guess is what she's called in the comics. And she's wielding Mjolnir in this movie, and we do see the cracks in Mjolnir in the trailers and everything else. So it does reform after Hela smashed it in Thor Ragnarok. So I guess my question is like, how exactly is this happening? Like, we've never seen anything that would indicate that Mjolnir could do that if it was broken. You know, it was a shocking moment when Mjolnir was smashed in Ragnarok, and it was the whole reason Thor had to go get a new weapon in the first place in Infinity War, because he didn't have Mjolnir anymore. So, like, if Mjolnir could reform or be reformed like that, then why didn't he do that? You know, I don't think Thor even understands, but it's kind of intriguing to me. I'm looking forward to seeing why exactly it does that. And I guess a kind of tie-in question to that also is, why is all of a sudden Jane Foster able to wield Mjolnir?
Now, here's to build off of that. For me, I think it has something to do with Thor the Dark World and the events that happened there, where she was possessed by the ether, that dark magic that then had to be removed with Asgardian magic, and Frigga, you know, sacrificed herself basically to save Jane, and Odin was, you know, fighting off the Dark Elves, and then Thor and Jane and all of them had to stop Malekith. I think that Asgardian magic that was used in the end to basically destroy the ether, or remove it from her so that it could be destroyed, even though it wasn't destroyed, but contained at least. And the fact that Jane was possessed by that is now giving her some sort of, you know, power to where she can now possess Mjolnir.
Yeah, but if you think about what Mjolnir, like the spell that was on Mjolnir, is that you have to be worthy to wield it. That's why nobody else other than Thor has been able to use it. I mean, up until Cap, and Vision's a technicality, I guess, but other than Captain America, like, we see he's worthy because he's like pure of heart and all that kind of stuff. So it might be that kind of magic, but like, it feels kind of convenient. Like, I know this happens in the comics as well. Like, when Jane gets cancer and she becomes Thor, it kind of reverts her cancer back to nothing. Like, every time she becomes Thor, it restarts her cancer basically. So that, I mean, I think that's the route they're going with this, but like, it still doesn't really explain exactly how Mjolnir is able to come back. Like, the way they have it be destroyed in the MCU makes it seem like it's a permanent loss. So it kind of takes that away a little bit. It also showing it sort of being brought back, essentially.
It also, for me, I guess begs the question is, does the spell still work for each individual piece of Mjolnir? Like, because if it doesn't just reforge itself and somebody had to put it back together for Jane to then be able to grab it, does that mean that everybody that touched the individual pieces of Mjolnir were also worthy of lifting Mjolnir, or did the spell
is it
break
broken once Odin was gone?
When it broke, did the spell break when Odin died?
Well, if you think about it, because Hela, the spell...
She didn't really hold it, though.
No, but
she
the
just
spell
kind of
on
stopped
Hela
it.
that was keeping her out
was because of Odin.
Yeah, so once he died, she was able to come back. Maybe the spells get deactivated once the person who made the spell... Yeah. You could also kind of maybe ask the question, is this still... Like, even though obviously it is Jane Foster, still played by Natalie Portman, but you could maybe ask the question, is this our Jane Foster from this universe? Or is this a different Jane Foster pulled in from the multiverse? Like, maybe Thor thinks it's his Jane Foster, but maybe it's a different one. Like, we're obviously starting to see what the multiverse looks like with all these movies starting to lean toward that, like Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange 2,
Right.
And we're obviously leaning toward Kang the Conqueror, I think, is going to be the next big villain. We saw that in Loki and everything else. All these shows now seem to be turning toward, like, reality bending and time travel and the multiverse and all that other stuff, so it makes sense if this was suddenly some kind of rift in the multiverse brings this version of Thor into the MCU. Maybe
this Jane, if this isn't our Jane for 616, maybe this is, like you said, from the multiverse that came through at some point, but also kind of is still our Jane in a way. Like, what I'm trying to say is, like, our Jane is still here. It's not like she's gone, So there could possibly be two Jane Fosters, both of whom had similar encounters in each universe. So everything that happened to this Jane could have similarly happened to that Jane. And so that's why she knows who Thor is. She knows Valkyrie. She knows what Mjolnir is and all of that kind of stuff, because it happened in the same manner that it happened in Earth 616. I don't think they're going to say that this is a different Jane Foster.
No, because
it'll get too complicated,
Mjolnir,
I think.
I guess. Yeah.
With everything else that's packed into this movie, I think it'll get too complicated to focus on the story of Jane Foster being from the multiverse.
Right, and she's wielding this Mjolnir, so, like, I feel like if she came from the multiverse, she'd have her own Mjolnir or whatever, but... I guess another question, still on the terms of, like, weapons and stuff, why exactly does Thor still need Stormbreaker? Like, we know his whole purpose of building Stormbreaker in the first place was to be able to defeat Thanos, and we saw how powerful it was in Infinity War. It was able to withstand the power of 6 Infinity Stones when he was blasting at Thor when he threw the thing, and it was powerful enough to kill Thanos in Endgame and everything else. So, like, after that, why exactly does he still need this? Like, we see him using it in the trailers against Gore the God Butcher with his, his sword that he has, so it's like, especially after seeing that Thor found out that he has the power inside him in Ragnarok. Like, he can summon the lightning, and it was in him all along, and that Mjolnir was just the thing to sort of help him contain his powers. Why does he still need Stormbreaker?
I think probably for the powers of the Bifrost, because we see when he's leaving where Zeus and all the other godheads are, whatever the place is called, that he uses in his goat-powered speedboat, he uses the power of the Bifrost, because we see the like
true.
rainbow underneath it.
I didn't even think of that.
I think that, and so that he can have more of a connection to the Guardians, because Groot's arm is part of Stormbreaker.
I'm guessing he's not going to have it through the whole movie. Like, he'll pull it out at the end to use it because he's battling this really powerful god or whatever Gore is.
Right.
So, but I just feel like maybe he doesn't need it, but they still want to, like, throw it in there because he has it, and, like, how do you explain why he's not using it, I guess, but I don't know. It just kind of that's a question that I've been kind of wondering as well from seeing these trailers and everything else. But not that Stormbreaker's not cool. I just think it's like at this point he doesn't need it because we only needed it for his battle with Thanos, really.
Right. That makes sense.
But you're right about the Bifrost thing. I forgot about that aspect of it.
I guess my question, the biggest question I've had going into this is, what is the purpose of the Guardians still being here? I mean, not that I don't like the Guardians. I know Thor went with them, at the end of Endgame. Yeah. And I don't think that they're going to be in the whole movie. I think it's going to start with him helping them, whatever, and then they'll part ways so that he can go back to New Asgard.
Well, there was a trailer where he actually says he's putting a team together to fight Gore, and he says he's got the Guardians, he's got Korg, his best friend.
So they are still with him.
So I'm guessing they're gonna play a role in this movie, but like you said, like why are they? Because
if this is meant to be about Jane, Thor, and Valkyrie,
mainly Thor's story,
and
basically,
Gore the God Butcher as their enemy, you don't need Groot and Rocket and Drax and Mantis, Nebula.
All the Guardians are in this movie.
Well, except Gamora. But like, why? I get he left with them and they're doing the Asgardians of the Galaxy type thing, but they really don't need to be here in this movie.
Right. Now, see, I think it would have made more sense if this was reversed. Like, if Thor was in the new Guardians of the Galaxy movie, that makes more sense to me, I feel like, because he's one person. He's now a member of their team because he left with them.
It's not five
he's good
of
friends
them
with them and stuff.
With him.
But them being in this movie kind of, like you said, sort of takes away from it being Thor's story, because that's mainly what this is. Like, I feel like at this point, Thor is probably going to be killed in this movie, and that's why he's not in the third Guardians movie, unless that takes place before this and they drop Thor off somewhere. I don't know exactly when that takes place in the timeline either, but I feel like Thor is going to die in this movie, and then we're going to have Jane Foster as Thor going forward. Like, not just because of, well, I mean, it kind of could be like contracts and stuff too. Like they've had Chris Hemsworth here in the MCU basically since the beginning.
Oh, and they are getting rid of all
that's why Robert Downey Jr. left the MCU. I mean, he was his character was killed.
Chris Evans is old,
and they seem to be building the young Avengers and everything. So like, Thor, this is mainly Thor's retirement story basically, and he's got one villain left to fight or something like that. So it doesn't make sense the Guardians are in this. I feel like they could be. It should just be a thing where like they drop him off somewhere and then he says goodbye and they go off on their own adventure, and then like Thor does his thing and stuff. And maybe they can meet back up in the future if Thor does make it out of this movie alive or whatever, but I just feel like when Marvel had that set up in Endgame that he's leaving with the Guardians, it should have immediately led into a Guardians of the Galaxy movie with Thor as part of their team. And even then, with Stormbreaker, like I said, he'd be too powerful to be a member of the Guardians of the Galaxy. I feel like them sticking around with him is for comic, or like sort of comic relief, or like comical purposes. Like to make it more funny, like having all the Guardians and stuff in this movie, rather than like them actually needing to be in this movie. Because what are they going to contribute to battling somebody like Gore the God Butcher?
I mean, no offense to the Guardians, but they were kind of pointless in Infinity War and Endgame too.
So. I mean, it was nice the way they brought them into joining the other people, like fighting alongside the Avengers and stuff. But like, we don't need. If Thor is going to be tagging along with them, he should be in their movie, not them being in his movie for the whole entirety of it.
The last question that I kind of want to bring up, and I think it's fairly obvious as a question, but what connection will Love and Thunder have with a Disney Plus show? Which I think it'll be Loki as the connection, which would kind of make sense because Loki and Thor. But we saw that like with Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, it had WandaVision, tied into it. And then I'm sure that later on down the line we'll get more kind of into other Disney Plus shows.
Yes.
Maybe there'll be a connection to Moon Knight or Miss Marvel with the Marvels. So there will be a connection there.
Yes.
So what will the connection be to that?
Well,
like, is Loki
think,
gonna show up, or is it just gonna be a mention?
For me, I think this fits best as like an end credits scene. Like, maybe whatever happened, like say Thor's still alive or whatever, and he's somewhere doing something, whatever, after the events of this movie or whatever, and Loki pops up somehow, and he tells Thor, hey, or Thor's obviously shocked, like Loki's alive again. Well, I mean, I guess he wouldn't be shocked at this point. Loki's been dead and alive multiple times, and Thor's used to it. But I think it would be really interesting to see that, and then like Loki could be like, someone is coming and I need to warn you, before it's too late or something. And that he's referencing, Kang the Conqueror, which we saw at the end of the Loki series. And obviously this would be the Loki from that series, so it's not the same Loki that has done all these things with Thor. Like, this is the new sort of reformed Loki, so like he would do that if he could. And I think it would be an interesting way to sort of tie into Loki season 2 and maybe use that when they get to that series or that season to show how he gets to that point where he's able to get back into the main MCU timeline and warn Thor.
I don't see, like, I hope that there's some connection to Loki. Like, Loki is my
because Loki's
favorite.
been in every other Thor movie, so you might as well.
I just don't see how it's going to, because at the end of the last episode of Loki, didn't he technically end up in a different reality?
Yes, but that's what I'm saying. They can use this to sort of...
How is he going to...
Loki season 2 will backtrack to show how he gets to this point. I don't know exactly how they'll do it, but, I mean, if he can use the TVA's technology to do it...
That's another question, though, too. Is it going to be this Loki that
it'll
we
be the
saw,
Loki from the
or
series.
will it be a variant of Loki that shows up?
I think it'll be, or even Sylvie.
Could
for
Sylvie
that matter.
show
It could
up?
be Sylvie that ends up.
Which is technically still Loki being in Thor.
Yes.
Because
if we're gonna have a female Thor, we might as well have a female Loki teaming up with her in the future. So
that could set up.
You have Sylvie there. I think that's going to be the big end credit scene type thing. It'll
with a
involve
connection
Loki.
to Loki.
But let us know what you guys think down in the comments section. What are your biggest questions about the movie before it comes out? Also, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more.
Remember, leave the scumbaggery at home, and we'll see you guys in the next one.
Bye, guys.
Subscribe.